Hello, welcome to OBJ versus GIF. I am David Nunez. I use the he, him pronouns. I have a short, dark beard with a little bit of gray mixed in. I wear glasses and I have a headset on. I'm wearing a gray cotton t-shirt and I'm sitting in front of a virtual background that is a solid purple color. I am here as a board member of MCN and to welcome you to the session. Please know that I and all the other board members are always willing to hear your feedback about how this conference is going for you. We want deeply for all of you to have a safe, fun, and interesting experience. Welcome. MCN is a nonprofit, volunteer-run professional organization committed to growing the digital capacity of museum professionals. MCN has developed a deep, active community engaged in year-round conversations, webinars, and resource sharing. As an MCN member, you can join special interest groups, participate in our mentorship program, and shape MCN's future in leadership roles as SIG chairs, conference chairs, and with time on the MCN board. If you're not already a member, we hope you will join us. Learn more at mcn.edu. I'd also like to thank Microsoft, Registration Assistance Fund sponsor, Axial, Ignite sponsor, and all the other sponsors listed on the program schedule for helping making this conference possible. This session is a presenter Q&A and conversation. We encourage all of you to turn on your cameras. I hope we're able to watch Emma's presentation ahead of time, but I'll also post the link in the chat box. We are using the chat box for questions. Please post your name in there and you will be called on to ask your question. But if you would prefer not to ask your question out loud, feel free to type it into the chat box and I'll do my best to try to read it on your behalf. Once again, this session is OBJ versus GIF. And now I'll turn it over to Emma Cieslik from Ball State University.
Thank you, David. I really appreciate it. Hello, everyone. My name is Emma Cieslik. I'm a student at Ball State University studying public history and anthropology. And this research session highlights my research conducted as a digital research intern at the Dr. Samuel D. Harris Museum of Dentistry this past summer. I was very eager to highlight a new alternative GIF digitization methodology, that it promotes accessibility and ease of time and commitment for institutions that are smaller to medium size that may not have the resources to allocate to large or expensive scale digitization strategies. The presentation highlighted how GIF file types are an inexpensive, effective, and less time-consuming and experience-consuming methodologies for producing digital object collections online. And it encouraged the use of GIF files until an alternative can be produced for 3D object digitization methodologies in different types of GLAM institutions. I look forward to hearing your questions, and in starting off the session, I wanted to highlight the first poll that we have for those who are tuning into the session. This poll highlights the different inhibitors for creating 3D object-related content. The question asks, what is the biggest inhibitor of creating more object-related content in your institution? 1, time, 2, expensive equipment, 3, expensive training, or 4, other? And while you're filling out that poll, I also wanted to mimic David's example. I am a white woman with dark brown hair, wearing thin-rimmed glasses and a black and white checkered blouse in front of a white background. It looks like for those that have responded to the poll, time is one of the biggest inhibitors in terms of creating more 3D content. This is what we saw throughout the presentation. Research that I conducted, especially because time with MeshLab, editing and cleaning up was the most stringent and biggest commitment for a lot of people and institutions. Even in expense and expensive training for equipment, time can be something that is a big inhibitor for people producing more digital items. Moving on to this next session, please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and I'll see if there are any other questions to get the conversation going.
So I'll jump in with a question.
Yes.
So my stereotype of GIFs are looping animations like Twitter memes. And one thing you mentioned in your talk was OBJ players give you the ability to like zoom in and zoom out and flip objects around. Is that interactive space well explored for GIFs?
That was the interesting part of the research for the presentation, is it really has not been explored as much. Giphy and different file program creation softwares that are often free and accessible for browsers and download on computers offer that, so you can not only embed content, but you can also stop frames. So if you're taking videos or specific pictures of different angles or even zooming in and out. It would allow you then, once you produce the final GIF, to do that zoom in and out and interactivity, but it is still to be explored. One of the favorite parts of my presentation was there is a archaeological website entrepreneur that uses GIF files to embed spectral data. So they embed X-ray data from paintings and other objects so that they can include information about how conservation processes take effect. So I'm hoping to continue that in the future. It's not as much an explored area, but GIF files are more of the less space and less storage area versus 3D models, which take up a lot of space and usually require embedded viewers.
Thank you. So we do have a couple comments and questions in the chat box.
Wonderful.
Joe Hobson was asking if people could provide links to 3D GIFs, preferably published by museums, in the chat box, or if Emma, you had some that we could go look for, please do call them out. And then Carla Schroer wanted to make a comment about file formats versus technologies.
Most definitely.
So, hi, I'm Carla. I actually teach photogrammetry for people that work in museums.
Yay!
And cultural heritage writ large, so archaeologists and libraries and historic sites and so forth. And I've been working in the digital imaging field for 20 years. Our nonprofit, Cultural Heritage Imaging, is a major player in the space. So I watched the video I ran. I didn't quite have the 3 minutes to finish it right before this, but I got most of the way through it. And I think, I guess from my perspective, I found it a little bit odd to focus on file formats rather than technology, because in my mind, what you're comparing is 3D, let's say photogrammetry, which was your focus, photogrammetry to produce a geometry, which is measurable, versus what historically we've called object movies or essentially stitched images that have no actual geometry. There's no positions in space, and there's no measurability. And so both of those have a place. They're both can be really useful. And I think you made that case really well in your talk, that they have these different attributes and they have different amounts of time involved. But in my mind, you're comparing technologies, not file formats, because how you collect the images is very different, depending on whether you're gonna do a photogrammetric approach or you're gonna do what you're calling a GIF, but really, I mean, object movies have been around for 20 years before that. And Adobe had a format in this space that not Adobe, Apple had a format in this space that they walked away from and left a lot of people in the lurch, leaving a lot of people with a bad taste in their mouth about that data. But my point being that you're really talking about two technological approaches that, and you laid out some of the pros and cons. I think in terms of the GIF approach, or the what I would call an object movie approach or stitched image approach, you didn't include the con that you don't have measurable data and you don't actually have geometry. So if you just want to show something in the round, it's fantastic. If you need geometry, you need an approach that will give you geometry. And I'll just make one other comment and then shut up because it's your presentation. But you have said here, and you said in the talk, that doing photogrammetry requires mesh cleaning and all this. If you shoot your images correctly, you don't need to do that. You get data from your images. So proper image collection will give you data that doesn't require as much editing. We use MeshLab occasionally, but most of our projects, we would just be putting together in photogrammetric software without going into like a mesh cleaning kind of tool. And I'll shut up.
I really appreciate it. And that I'm glad that you pointed that out, because in the research that I presented, I actually wrote a paper on it. And that was one thing that I didn't have a chance to highlight in my presentation, was that one downside, one of the disadvantages, is that a lot of 3D digitization methods provide measurable data, and they have a better conceptualization of the 3D space that's essential to how cultural heritage professionals work with objects. One of the wonderful examples was the use of 3D object digitization models to measure historic violins that were often damaged by the use of calipers because they were often in contact. And I really appreciate you highlighting it. That was one disadvantage for the use of GIF files and object movies in that sense. One of the other things with comparing file types versus technology methods was when I went to conduct the research and looked at the literature, not being able to conduct as much in person as part of the research, there was a lot more research and literature based in file formats as opposed to technology processes. And I worked with photogrammetry over the past summer to digitize Peruvian pots. And while we ran into time as well, there wasn't as comparable a methodology that was in place, like you mentioned, David, for GIF file and object movement movies created. So I appreciate you highlighting that. That was one thing I was hoping to expand on in the future, was focusing more on the technology pipeline for using GIF files and object movies, and focusing on the technology rather than file formats. But in the presentation, the OBJ versus GIF seemed like one of the more logical comparison points to branch off of. But I really appreciate you highlighting that.
Emma, you mentioned a paper. Is there a link that we could find that if I were to start to Google?
Yes, the paper actually is currently under review by Studies in Digital Heritage. So I would love to share it at this point, but it's currently under review for moving forward. And it does focus more on the technology aspect as opposed to the file format. So for this presentation, I did the OBJ versus GIF, but I'm hoping with the paper moving forward, it focuses more on the technology process.
If there are any questions, please drop them in the chat box. If not, I'll continue with my list of ringers. So one of your slides talked a little bit about moving forward, and especially during the COVID pandemic. Right now, many museums are exploring digitizing entire galleries as a way to offer sort of a virtual sort of gallery experience. Could GIFs be an effective way to do that, do you think?
That's an interesting point to bring up. I work as the collections assistant at the David Owsley Museum of Art on my university's campus. And this is one thing that they've done, is they 3D digitize the gallery space. I don't necessarily know if GIFs, because they don't capture object geometry and space geometry, would be as effective a method to capture galleries, but I think it would definitely be effective to explore. I think that for a lot of, that's what I was hoping with GIF files and object movement movies, was for a lot of collections, photogrammetry is a wonderful method, but for museums that don't necessarily have the technology or expertise to undertake full collection photogrammetry scanning, it might be best to move into GIFs as an alternative. But I think that's a wonderful idea to explore in the future moving forward.
We do have a question from Drew Robarge. Could one downscale an OBJ to a GIF or a panoramic view?
That's a really good question. With the object geometry in each of the files, it does show that a lot of different collection management softwares are using GIF files. It appears that with OBJ, you can downsize it to the specific photographs and object geometry that are present. So I've did that in my past work with photogrammetry, took 3D digitized Peruvian pots and turned them into JPEG images that then I could alter in Photoshop. So I believe it is possible if you convert it first in taking down those images in a still image and then convert it into a GIF file, or if you're taking still images of alternating the 3D object model and then using that to create a full 360-degree image that can be used for flipbooks like GIF files. So that's a wonderful question, and something that would be very interesting, especially for museums, so that they can input them within collections management software systems.
To follow up, you many times throughout your presentation, you talked about the hundreds of different kinds of file formats that in particular 3D technologies tend to use. Are there similar versioning questions around GIFs in particular, or what? And I guess I was really going with the question is, what are the long-term sort of digital preservation implications of choosing a GIF format versus maybe an OBJ format?
I really appreciate you asking that. And one thing I wanted to highlight with my presentation, and actually why I focused on file formats, is one of the downsides with 3D object digitization, which a lot of European consortiums are working to alter for the future, is that a lot of 3D object files aren't standardized. So the problem moving forward is OBJ files, a good number of the field have invested in the file format, so it likely will be it'll have a longevity into the future. But GIF files, like you had pointed out, have existed since the 1970s. Even object movies have existed before that in the basis of creating a movie itself with a flipbook concept. So using the GIF file format would definitely be a method that ensures longevity of collection digitized models, and can also be used moving forward in embedding within collection software, especially using Embark and Outlook and different Omeka softwares that can be used and easily shared within those files because they're very small, similar to JPEG files, but they also have the accuracy of TIFF files. So they're combining those two things that are very important to cultural heritage fields.
Can I jump in on the archiving question? Because our organization is working, this is a huge effort for us. So we do photography-based imaging, including reflectance transformation imaging, multispectral photogrammetry. And one of the reasons we've chosen that is because we think it's the easiest to archive. And from our perspective, the image set is the archive. So if you're doing photogrammetry, the OBJ file, the PLY file, whatever that is, that's current presentation layer. That is not the archive. The archive is an image set that you collected and metadata to go with it, and metadata is key. So we're working on open source tools called the Digital Lab Notebook to collect and manage metadata to go with your image-based stuff. And we have some archival submission tools. We have an NEH grant, it's all open source. So we have a beta tools out now. We'll be releasing more in that space. But the point being that the 3D model is not the archive. The original input data, which is the images, is the archive. And so from that perspective, if you need measurable data, photogrammetric image sets are going to give you that.
Most definitely. I really appreciate you saying that. And photogrammetry in the project, when I was doing research into different 3D digitization methodologies, photogrammetry was way up there because it was one of the most effective, the easiest to implement, and also for taking those wonderful photographs, one of the best ones that you could transfer from taking direct photographs to having a 3D model product. So I really appreciate you saying that.
Emma, we have another question in the chat.
Awesome.
Also from another Emma Schaefer. Does altering a cultural heritage object into a digital object with a GIF or animation run into any problems with artist attribution? That being the original artist of the physical object, the technology that provides the platform for a GIF or animated file, or the person behind the screen?
That is a wonderful question. I really appreciate you asking that. And one of the interesting questions that's moving forward with 3D digitization is wondering for people that, and it takes wonderful skill and an immense skill to work from taking an object using photogrammetry to create a 3D model that people can engage with online, which is really exciting. Moving forward, one of the interesting questions is what is the difference between the cultural and artistic license of the actual object itself, moving into being able to recreate that object in 3D space, which requires its own level of artistry, creativity, ingenuity, and skill. So it's an interesting question to consider moving forward in the cultural heritage field with wonderful practitioners like Carla Schroer, I hope I'm pronouncing it okay, that is doing wonderful work in the field and involves a great deal of skill that should be recognized and celebrated in the final product that's moving towards the audience, museum visitor, or the scholar that's using the end product. I really appreciate you asking.
You mentioned one of the limitations of GIFs might be the color space that it can support or cannot support.
Yes.
But they do offer transparency. Could you just talk a little bit more about that and what are ways to mitigate for any potential loss of data?
That's a wonderful question. Yes, one of the interesting things with GIF files is in comparison to photogrammetry, which is wonderful in recreating object texture and the geometry, GIF files run into, they only have 256 colors that they can use within their spectrum. One of the questions moving forward is figuring out how those colors can be recreated in the space and how they can be used to mimic surface texture, which is one thing that GIFs cannot recreate as in comparison to photogrammetry. So moving forward, it would be interesting to look at how that can be embedded, as well as in moving to an archival document in the future. something that wouldn't have all of those geometric spaces, how GIF files can be used to create an archival quality that has the transparency, but also has the color accuracy that would be needed up to snuff for use in object collections for future.
Please do. Oh, here we go. So from Drew Robarge, do GIF files have the ability to embed alt text for accessibility?
That's a wonderful question. That's what I'm currently hoping to explore, because one of the things that I do love about 3D, I do love 3D object digitization, is that a lot of different file formats, especially the example I highlighted in the presentation with the chess pieces from the British Museum, was the ability to embed catalog and curation content into the 3D model. GIF files are working towards that. They are able to embed written text within the different files, especially using Giphy and some other softwares that are available. But that's what I'm definitely hoping to explore in the future. Hopefully that text can be recognized by an alt text reading program, but it hasn't thoroughly been explored for how that can be used to increase accessibility for people who are using it in online collection database formats. But a wonderful question moving forward.
So we have just a few minutes left. I'm curious, I'm sure there are people on this call who are considering doing this kind of activity in their small museums, maybe without a lot of resources. What are sort of the practical kind of first steps somebody could take to experiment with creating GIFs for this kind of purpose?
That's a wonderful question. That's what I was hoping moving forward is for somebody who's eager to engage in GIF files, they can either use a telephone, which a lot of 3D softwares and even photogrammetry are utilizing now with mobile devices, as well as DSLR cameras, including Nikon or Canon. Using that files, they can work to either create object videos that are surrounding the object moving in different angles and lighting that somebody who's viewing it behind a display case made of glass might not be able to gain the full 360-degree experience. So experimenting with the best setting and lighting that you have accessible in your institution, and then taking those different images or the video around the object that can then be embedded into the GIF creation software and produce this GIF file that can be embedded in the collection software. So moving forward, it's similar in the same pipeline as photogrammetry, in taking different images at different altitudes, at different angles, and figuring out the best way that those can be integrated together to similar to an object flipbook or a movie. So moving forward, just working on that experimenting step, knowing what resources are available. And it's such an accessible technology for many people that use them, like you mentioned, for meme GIFs or GIFs that they can share on their phone, that people that are in institutions can actually move forward with sharing them on telephones. So one thing I was hoping is, like a lot of different institutions are using 3D models for visitors to zoom in and out, to flip around, to turn an object up virtually on its head. But with GIF files, you can easily embed QR codes throughout institutions so that people can scan and take those with them. So that might be an exciting way moving forward that institutions can engage with visitors and can also start undertaking that process.
Emma, I just wanted to check. I know you had a couple other polls you wanted to. Oh, before we do that, there's a question from Steve Brady. What is the practical difference in quality between using the best mobile devices, phones, and DIY versus traditional DSLR and contractors for smaller, especially for smaller museums or less resource institutions to accomplish this?
That's a wonderful question. And that's what I was hoping to highlight. Just like photogrammetry, with some research in the literature that documents the use of mobile devices are geared for the creation of GIFs. A lot of them are pulling either from the internet, or you're just taking movies with your phone. So one of the beauties that I love of GIF files is that you can actually just open your camera on your phone, move around your object and create that object movie, or create the stills that are used to create that flipbook. You can also use that with a DSLR camera that will probably capture better color and surface color that you're obtaining because of the level of accuracy with that technology, but not necessarily. So especially for smaller to medium-sized institutions, GIFs may be an excellent option because they can be downloaded using that app, or can be used with a browser on your phone that can be uploaded. So I would say that GIF files using your telephone as the data extraction method may not have as accurate or as color specific an outcome or a product, but it'll definitely provide a product that can be then used moving forward.
If I can jump in on that, this is part of the differences that we were talking about before too. From our perspective, while you can do photogrammetry with a phone, you will not get
Yes.
the kind of geometric precision that you will get if you use a DSLR locked down, properly managing everything. So again, everything's about fit for purpose, right? If you want to just have something on the web that people can spin around and look at, even if you're a big high-end museum, this can be a really quick and dirty way to get some of that kind of content out there. If you really need high precision geometry of a subject, then you're going to need to be able to not just take the pictures, but carefully manage how you take those pictures in order to get the precision that you need. But properly done photogrammetry can have very high precisions, way sub-millimeter. We repeatedly get measurable data down to a 1/10 of a millimeter. So again, it depends on your goal and the project and the costs, all the trade-offs that you need to make.
I really appreciate it. Your interjections have been wonderful for the presentation. I really appreciate it. And it's definitely brought a wonderful perspective to photogrammetry. So I'm so glad you could be here. And that's actually what I was hoping. And with our last poll moving forward, I know we only have a couple more minutes. I was hoping if we could bring up the poll focused on what you're going to take away from the session moving forward. Yes, so after watching the session, and I know that everyone is at a different place where they are in terms of their presentation or what technology they're currently using. So I'm just curious, after watching my presentation, will you investigate the use of GIF files for your collection? 1, yes. 2, maybe. 3, totally okay, probably not. Or 4, no. Wonderful. That's so exciting. So it looks like we're about half and half with yes and maybe. I really appreciate it. It's a new preliminary field to study the use of GIF files within cultural heritage. And with everything that's wonderful happening with photogrammetry, it will definitely have hard competition to beat for the wonderful work happening with photogrammetry. But I'm excited to continue the research moving forward and seeing what can be done.
So if there are no further questions, I do want to call out a really positive comment from Anka in the chat box. Definitely you should read that, Emma. It's a compliment to you. So, and I want to just thank you for your time and wisdom today. I think it was a really great presentation, and I'll also thank the audience for your participation and interest.
I really appreciate it. And moving forward, please, I'll make sure to keep moving forward with that paper, but I'm also really excited to move forward with the suggestion about alt text and accessibility. I think that it'll be interesting to see what can be done in the future with GIF files, but also moving forward where work with GIF files won't be as necessary as moving forward with 3D models that become more accurate every single day and more accessible with wonderful different technologies and different opportunities and trainings that are becoming available for cultural heritage professionals. So I really appreciate everyone that tuned in and the wonderful wisdom that helped with my presentation. I really appreciate it.